In today's episode of the Cannon Podcast, join us as we discuss the evolution of Gabriel Martinelli, break down a new role for Kai Havertz, get an update on the future of Takehiro Tomiyasu, and discuss the breaking news regarding David Raya.
Yes, guys, welcome back to the Cannon Podcast. Today I am joined with George. Unfortunately, Alex can't make it, but me and George are going to break down everything during this, I'd say, normally boring international break. George, how do we survive during these football? I can't talk about the international break because it's so hard to watch the games, let alone break it down. But what do you make of it so far?
It's long, isn't it? It gets to the point, I feel like, by the end of these things where you're always like, oh, the next week we've got football. And then you just start counting down the hours. It really goes down like that for me, at least. And it was difficult because I felt like there wasn't much news in general.
Yeah.
I think arguably maybe the biggest news was the Everton point deduction break that we already knew about. And then I think beyond that, it was just really boring. Not even many links to get people excited about either. So it was just a very boring break, and just can't wait to get Brentford up on Saturday.
There was an interesting game, though, involving Brazil and our Brazilian boys, Gabriel, and Gabriel. A very physical game against Argentina, where all three of them started, and they lost. Unfortunately, it was 1-0 to Argentina, but it was a big game. But in terms of Brazil, there's been a lot of talk recently about the Martinelli's inclusion to the team and, potential future as a centre forward. Now, I'm not sure if he was playing there in this game or in the game prior to that, but there was a goal that he scored, his first ever Brazil goal, where he kind of was playing in the middle in that phase, placed into the back of the net first time, very instinctive finish. I think you spoke about on Twitter as well. Martinelli as a centre forward, we've spoken about in the past, but how far away do you think it is of actually seeing it in an Arsenal team?
I think it a lot depends on who that marquee signing is going to be, and I've always felt like we kind of talked about it last time in terms of, he's a player that can be both at left wing and both at striker positions. I've always felt like he's carried more individual benefit in those central areas. It's quicker with him. It's less thought out, like those natural instincts, when to release, when to kind of, finish. And his variety of finishing is really quite big. Right. And of course, I'm going to repeat that reference of Luis Suarez. That's who I see him as a player. And I just think that, one of the biggest reasons, it's not just the movement that we see, but it is that finishing acumen. Do you remember last season? There was, I forget who was against, but it was Tomiyasu floating that half space cross over the top for Martinelli to kind of finish over the top of his head. Brilliant invention to do it. And it's not just that type of goal that he's able to do. He's able to kind of see the pitch and find space where there is none, whether that's in the box or out wide. And I just think that is better, especially as teams sit back more and we've faced more low blocks. We're going to need players that can find a different way if we're not able to physically move them and we're not able to break them down effectively through passing patterns and accessing the center of the pitch. So, he's going to be important. He can do it on either side. But I think a big thing depends on kind of who that marquee signing is. For example, I'm just shouting out names, but, are you going to go Rafael Leao or are you going to go Victor Osimhen? Very different players, both that could help facilitate Martinelli in different positions. Yeah. But again, very different philosophies.
What dynamic would you prefer as a fan? Is it that Martinelli is a striker and Leao as an option? And that's just the name, of course. Or is it that more traditional striker, which I think fans are crying out for? Old school number 9. You see City have got Haaland, United have invested in Højlund as well. That's physical number 9 like Osimhen. What route do you think, in the current way the world football's going, is more suited to Arsenal?
It's a tough question because I'm always about value. For me personally, like I look at value first. So a big reason by going for, let's say, like a Leao, and it doesn't have to be that name, but a superstar winger, a Leroy Sané, like somebody that would really change the complexion of our winger dynamics. If you go that route, and you would be a deviation from the greater football fraternity who are going the big traditional 9 route. I think that for me, I've grown up on loving multiple different players. Obviously, we all love Thierry Henry as Arsenal fans, and that prototype, your Nicolas Anelka, that kind of lab-grown striker for me is what I love. And so getting Martinelli as a center forward is in that mold. So I don't mind going the winger route. The one thing I will say, though, is that it would be a big transition. And the one thing that I do like from, say, a Victor Osimhen is I don't feel that you compromise on those aspects with a player like him, because he gives you that physical presence, that player to play off of, that physical frame. But then at the same token, he's also somebody that's able to provide the movement, go out wide, allow some interchange. And so you get kind of the best of both worlds with somebody of that type. That's why he's going to be the most pursued player on the planet next year. So honestly, I don't mind. I think value answers my question. I've seen the team succeed in so many different ways. And I put a post actually up on X recently where I talked about how clubs and fans, we have a bias to particular profiles in clubs. So for example, your Gilberto Silvas, your Patrick Vieira's are things that Arsenal fans align with. So Declan Rice will immediately be something that fans love. Whereas Jorginho, which ironically probably really gets accepted at Liverpool, but maybe not as much at Arsenal, for the fact that we're more traditionally grown up, at least in our identity, on these big, strong, powerful carriers in the middle of the park, Emmanuel Petit, you know. So I think for me, I've seen us win in many different ways. I'm kind of the one that wants to choose the best value play, and then I'll build from there. I don't never have like an opinion on who needs to be in my front line. The one thing that I will say is I think that we need to get Martinelli and Saka closer to goal.
Yep.
I know that could be a cop out, but you can do it in multiple ways. I'm not married to one way. It doesn't have to be an Evan Ferguson. It doesn't have to be a Victor Osimhen. It could be a Rafael Leao. It could be a multitude of different players. But the one thing I know is I need Martinelli and Saka closer to goal, and more frequently as well, because they're not getting the superstar treatment that they deserve.
The question that I think then becomes is, you look at Arsenal's actual pursuit of targets, and in terms of forwards, they've actually gone for more left wing targets than strikers. So maybe Mikel Arteta sees a similar pattern, because the pursuit of Pedro Neto, but more Mykhailo Mudryk, and the signing of Trossard as well. We've not really seen Martinelli used as a centre forward when we've seen Trossard in the team, and maybe that's something that we can see this season, because I would argue that he's probably our best finisher. In terms of just natural instinctive finishing, Martinelli's our best finisher. So I think it could be a wise move to play him more centrally and try him out there. We've played him in a few games where he struggled physically. So I think that's the question that Arsenal fans will have, is can he provide us that backboard that some fans want, that outlet? But I think he's growing in that demand. I think, and also is he still 22 years of age? We're not going to expect a complete profile, but I think he was what's compared to Luis Suarez. And, kind of, at times you can see it. But, we'll see how Mikel Arteta evolves that. There's another player that we need to talk about as well, who played in a very weird position during his international break. We're talking about Kai Havertz, left back, George. He scored as well in his first game, 5 minutes into it. I don't know if you watched the games, but can you understand the dynamic behind it?
Yeah, I mean, Julian Nagelsmann is kind of that modern coach as well, in very much in those positional molds. I mean, left back, I mean, let's have it right. It's a left 8 role, like maybe on paper he lines up as left back, but he's given the freedom to kind of excel and put himself higher up the pitch. I mean, I don't think that I would love to see him at Arsenal continue to play that way. I've always felt like, at least to maximize his current value right now, we need to play Kai Havertz as a center forward, or at the very least at right central midfield. I think he sees the pitch better from the right side of the pitch. I'll maintain that. And I think also we need to talk about the role of the right side versus the left side, because at Arsenal, for example, at least with Germany, he had the freedom to kind of arrive into the box and be one of the higher players, despite operating at left back on paper. Whereas I think at Arsenal, the right central midfielder is the one that's operating a little bit higher than the left central midfielder at this point. And the left central midfielder is responsible for a little bit more second phase responsibility. So he has to come in and help and build up a little bit more. And he's not quite the same as the Xhaka role of last season. Things have switched. And so for me, if you're going to maximize Kai Havertz, get him closer to goal, which is the right central midfield role. And so that's how I would operate him at Arsenal. I don't know about him as a left back or even as a left 8 in the future. I think we've seen the sample enough. Like, I don't know how many more times we need to see that he's just not seeing the pitch in the same way. He's doing okay, but I don't think you expect okay for 65 million pounds.
Yep.
There's things that you can justify in terms of why things aren't working 100%. Some of it's on him, some of it's on Mikel, and we've kind of exhausted those topics here on the pod. But broadly speaking, I think that international breaks are a time for people to experiment because they're approaching the Euros. I don't think he was the only one. I think a lot of coaches are thinking, how can I best use these players as I kind of work towards getting a settled 11, right? And I think by March, where you'll start to see like a lot of the European teams be settled in their final 11s and be settled in their formations and in their roles. But I think right now it's just simple, creative, kind of marking creative ways of applying Kai Havertz, because he's seen what he's done at Arsenal and he's seen the role, which is really quite similar to Arsenal's role, just used a little bit differently, because Germany have this weird collection of 6'8s that aren't exactly anchors. They've got Gundogan, Kimmich, who are vying for specific roles, right? So there's a lot of clogging happening there. So in order to fit in Kai Havertz with that midfield signing, as well as making sure that they've got the right balance, I think Nagelsmann is just playing around with different pieces.
Yeah, I think we'll see how he fits back into Arsenal, and I think post-international break we'll really find out what Havertz is made of, because there's no more international football at least until March. So now I think Havertz's time to maybe get some goals, and I think that's the key part, is confidence. Scoring goals is what he's been brought in to do. That's what fans are going to judge him by. And if he can score some goals in some important games, then fans are going to respect him more. Let's talk, though, about Gabriel Jesus. Now, George, Jesus played and started. He is back now to full fitness to start against Argentina. Didn't score, but there were some intriguing quotes after the game where he kind of talked about goal scoring not being his strength. Now, we've talked about in the past the fact that Jesus is a bit underrated, and I think his goals and assist numbers are still up there with some of the best in Premier League history. But Jesus versus Roberto Firmino has been a debate on Twitter recently. Firmino, of course, is now in Saudi Arabia. Jesus is still thriving in the Premier League. In terms of those two profiles, people always compare them in terms of false nines. Do you think Jesus is, again, being underrated here by people saying that Firmino is well clear of him?
I mean, it's weird because I think you look at the numbers and just the pure facts, and Jesus outscores Firmino in terms of goals per 90 in the Premier League, right? So for all the claims that Gabriel Jesus is not clinical, the numbers don't always agree when you compare these profiles. I think that generally speaking, the problem is, right, one person won and one person didn't win. And one person is perceived as leaving a winning team to go to a team that hasn't won yet. I think that's a huge part in all this. Generally, I think Gabi Jesus has the potential to do more with his career than Firmino's done. I think Firmino won, so it's difficult for you to say that one's better than the other. I hear that side of the argument. I just think that, Jesus does more in different areas of the pitch. Therefore, he's always going to be a more rounded profile. He's going to be able to do more. Firmino, for all of his brilliant facilitation, by the way, and I think he had a lot better spatial awareness for the pass. Gabi Jesus is much more of a carrier, a threatener. He's definitely somebody who wants to finish moves. Firmino wasn't exactly that. He definitely was somebody that was fine to facilitate, fine to build, and fine to help the team out in actually deeper areas. Because I think despite Jesus dropping, he's not somebody that dictates the attack. Firmino dictated the attack. Jesus drops to help out, but he ultimately wants to facilitate getting on the end of chances. Firmino was quite happy to let those fall to Mane and Salah. So I think the facilitation word is kind of overdone by people on Twitter, and I think that's why they're being compared, probably wrongly. But I will maintain, I think that Jesus is a more rounded profile. I don't think that Firmino does what Jesus can do on the wing in terms of creating separation, in terms of being a touchline winger on either side. He doesn't carry that functionality. I think that he is much more clinical than Jesus, and he's got a better creative passing range than Jesus does. But Jesus is a much more dominant dribbler, a much better presser off the ball, and they're different players for me, fundamentally. It's just, I find it ironic when people start to critique the composure and the goals and use that as an argument when Jesus has outscored Firmino in his time in the Premier League. I just find that a little odd. But again, it all comes down to the fact that one has won and one hasn't. Well, I mean, he has. He's won with City.
Yeah,
but,
that's what I was going to say.
But
for me, he's severely
he's at
underrated.
a team that isn't winning. I think that's the thing.
Yeah. I think Firmino's role, you're right, in helping Liverpool achieve the Champions League success and Premier League success, and that front three when you're a part of Salah and Mane, you're obviously going to be elevated as well. And Saka and Martinelli are very good players, but they're not quite at that level yet, where those two are in the peak of their powers, world-class players, providing in Champions League nights. I think with Jesus, he's very close to being a very perfect profile, in the sense of he does what Firmino offers. He can drop down, he can play make, he can dribble and, do a lot of the things that maybe Haaland can't do. And he can also get himself in the right areas. It's just about that composure in the final third. And he still scores goals. And I think that's the thing. His movement elevates him over Firmino. Firmino wasn't in those goal-scoring positions enough. That's why he didn't score the goals. Jesus is. It's just a matter of, taking those chances on a more clinical basis. But most strikers miss chances. I mean, Erling Haaland is always at the highest in the league in terms of big chances missed. Because that's what fans, think about Jesus is, he misses big chances, he don't score goals. He does score goals. And I think his record speaks for itself. But I think, again, it's just nostalgia for sure. And it's, as you said, winning bias. If Arsenal win a title with Jesus as a striker, that debate will go out of the window. But until then, we're going to have to entertain it. And Firmino's a great player, by the way. I'm not going to say Firmino's not a good player. Very good player. But I just think Gabriel Jesus has more to his game, as you also alluded to as well. But we need to now talk about, the future of Takehiro Tomiyasu. George, there's been rumours that Bayern Munich have interest in signing him in January and have had interest for a long time. So with that kept in mind, reports have come out since then that Arsenal have opened talks over negotiations of a new contract. I saw a tweet from Alex discussing the potential of selling Tomiyasu if an offer arrived of 50-60 million pounds. Now that's not him saying sell Tomiyasu, but it's him saying like, if an offer arrives of that amount, you can't say no to it. What do you make of Tomiyasu's future? Is he a must-keep player, or is it a player if a right offer arrives and you got to let him go?
Thanks for checking out the Cannon Podcast. To hear the full episode, sign up as a YouTube member on this channel or go to patreon.com/thecannonpod.